Hi there, welcome to the channel. My name's Brian and today I'm going to talk to you about how I like to paint Ultramarines. When I sat down trying to figure out how I wanted to paint them, I realised I wasn't a huge fan of the Retributor armour, McCrag blue style of Ultramarines, and really wanted to base them more on the Space Marines from the video game from a few years ago. So I sat down one afternoon and mixed a whole bunch of paints together, and this is what I ended up with. The mix is quite simple and you can get most of these things pretty easily, I'm sure. It's 2 drops of Ulthuan Grey and then 1 drop of Thousand Suns Blue, 1 drop of Talisar Blue, and then really any dark grey just to dull it down a bit will do the job just fine. Once you've got a solid base coat down of the Ultramarine Blue, I come at the whole thing with a layer of wash, and for this I'm using Army Painter Dark Tone. I'm a big fan of these washes. And if you haven't tried them, I really urge you to. They're really easy to use. You get a really nice, smooth coat with them, and they're really easy to push about the model and pull into the places that you want it to be. I'm a big believer in really taking your time at this stage as well to really get a nice smooth layer and to, like I said, push the wash and to pull it into places where you want it to be. When it comes to areas like the Aquila on the chest, I really like to pull the brush up against the grain and it lets the wash settle into the recesses and really sort of push it into the areas under the helmet there to give it a nice shadow effect as well. Once the wash is dry, you can see you've got a really nice smooth finish there and all the recesses looking nice and dark. So we're going to move on to a bit of dry brushing now, and for this I'm using some of the original Ultramarine blue that I use in the base coat. I like to put it straight onto the piece of kitchen roll there and then take any large, soft, flat brush that you can. Really work it into the bristles, and then when it comes to dry brushing I like to get as much off as I can there. Really work it into the bristles and get off so it almost feels like there's hardly any paint there. Start working from the top down and just gently go around, working your way down, and you can see that already putting a nice shade effect onto the top of the pauldron there. Work your way around gently, slowly, small amount of paint on the brush, and I'm a firm believer in less is more with this, like I said, going around a couple of times, building up the coats gently there, and you'll end up with a really nice result. For the next highlight, I'm using Army Painter Void Shield Blue, but any light blue will do the job here. A small dry brush, again, a flat one, makes the job much easier, and just really gently, really small amount of paint on the brush there, just catching the top parts of the model, over the helmet here. I'll jump down onto the sort of collar part of the armour, and again, keep as little on the brush as you can, especially with a bright highlight like this, because the last thing you want is a big streak of paint up the model. Next up, this is the fun part, we're moving on to the gold. For this I'm using Tamiya Titan Gold. I'll be honest, these paints are an absolute nightmare to work with. They're alcohol based paints, so certainly don't use your fancy Winsor & Newton Series 7 brushes or whatever for these things. They're very difficult to work with, but they set so beautifully and give you such a real metal looking finish there that they are worth the effort. A handy tip when you're using these is keep a small shot glass with some isopropyl alcohol. Keep the brush nice and moist while you're using them, because the paint does dry super quickly, so you will need to do a bit backwards and forwards between the paint on the palette and the isopropyl alcohol in your shot glass there. Now that the golds are looking pretty good, I've just gone over some of the basic details there with a layer of black paint, and next I'm going to use is some Army Painter gunmetal paint, and really pretty simple, just the teeth on the chain sword here. We get a layer of silver, some of the details there will get done as well, some of the details on the gun, and always don't forget about the space between the armour as well. Next up we're going to move on to the eyes, and for this I'm going to put a layer of corn red down. Take whatever brush you have that has the finest point on it, get the paint nice and thin, and just gently, patiently put a thin layer of corn red over the most bulbous part of the lens. We'll come back to the eyes in a bit, but it's back to my old pal Dark Tone here. I'm going to basically do what I did before, just dollop it into the areas around the recesses of the metal work that I've done before, pushing it into the edges around the Aquila, over the top, helps create a nice shadow over the top of it, and just gently getting around the edges there as well. Something else I quite like to do at this point is just feed some dark tone in around the lenses of the eye there. It does two things. It just helps give the lenses a bit of depth, a bit dulls down the corn red for the next step, which we're about to move on to. And for that, we're going to use some Wild Rider red, which is a really nice, bright, orangey red part. When I'm doing eyes, I like to think of it as in thirds, and for this, I'm going to call this the first third. It's closest to the nose. Just put a wee thin dropping closest to the nose and bring it around the bottom part of the lens there. You can do that on both sides. Just take your time, nice and gently, just work that in there. Don't worry if you put too much into the middle part of the eye. We'll come over to that in a second. Because what we're going to do next is take some Evil Sun Scarlet, which is very similar, just slightly darker and a bit more red. I'm going to go into the middle third of the eye and just put a thin layer of that down as well. And what that does is it gives you a nice gradient from the orangey part towards the nose, towards the darker sort of corn red part at the back of the eye. The final and most stressful part is taking a thin layer of Corax white and putting a tiny dot in the upmost part in the corner of the eye to give it that really glassy look and just help it pop off. If you want to add a bit of detail to the black there on the weapons, you can just take a small dry brush and any grey will do the job here. I'm using a Space Wolf grey colour, but anything will just help these details pop out a little bit more. One last wee finishing touch, taking some Talisar blue for the plasma coils and the plasma pistol. I've already put a layer of Corax white down, and a big healthy blob here of the Talisar blue gives a really nice effect for the plasma coils there. Contrast paints are really good for effects like this, and if you really want to add a bit more depth onto that, once it's dry, take some white paint, a little dry brush over the top, take some turquoise and just make them stand out a little bit more, and that should look pretty nice. One last thing I like to do with every miniature is just give it a good spray with some matte varnish. If you don't have an airbrush, you can get these in a can pretty easily, and just go over the whole thing, and that takes away the shininess of the washes that we've used and all the different types of paints. It helps level them up. And there you have it, one painted Ultramarine. Probably not my best paint job, but I grossly underestimated how hard it was to paint with a camera in front of you. Hope you enjoyed the video. If there's anything that you'd like to ask me questions of, I'll leave a link to my Twitter in the description below. Anything else you think you'd like to see me do a video on, then send me a message. I'm always open to ideas. I'm looking for things to do videos on because I want to try and do some more of this. So hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.